So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Tyrone Goodwyn has researched the genealogy and history of free persons of color of southeastern North Carolina for over 40 years. He concentrates on Pender, New Hanover, Sampson, Duplin, Wayne, and Cumberland counties in North Carolina. In the past few years, he has expanded his research into his family roots in southeastern Virginia. Today will be Tyrone's 5th presentation with Pender County Library, going all the way back to 2017. And we are thrilled to have him with us again today. Please join me in welcoming Tyrone Goodwyn.
I'm really excited to be here. I'm happy to see you here in the room. I'm happy to know there's people on Zoom. This feels like church. I'm used to a hybrid life now. I'm just not used to being on this side of the camera. I am Tyrone Goodwyn. I'm the son of Gabriel Jacobs of Pender County, right here in Burgaw. My folks have been on Cypress Creek in Pender County, which was New Hanover originally, since the 1700s. So this is literally my folks that we're about to talk about. Again, I'm happy to work with Pender County Library. They've always been great partners, and I'm also happy to have a partnership with Eastern Shore Public Library in Virginia for the first time. So I'm looking forward to working with them in the future. This is going to be in 4 sections. It's about a website that I put most of my work on the website, and I'm going to continue to put more information on that website. There's 4 chunks we're going to go through. We're going to go through the Jacobs as they were entrenched into the formation of America. We're going to talk about the Jacobs employed as free people of color. We're going to talk about the Jacobs enslaved by John Custis II, which is a significant name that you guys may already be going woo on. Then we're going to talk about Jacobs imported, like how they may have gotten here from Angola. But before I go through those 4 distinct chunks, I need to do a little level setting. And so that's going to be the first piece. So we're going to do 10 minutes of me talking and 10 minutes of me answering your questions. This first bit may feel a little disjointed to you because I have to kind of give you a context. So bear with me. It's 10 minutes. I need you to hang on for that part so we can get to the other part. Is that fair? Can we do that? All right, let's roll. Am I moving or you moving, Shan? Oh. Okay. So who are we talking about? I say the Jacobs. When I say the Jacobs, who am I talking about? There's layers. So think of it as an onion. At the center of that onion, when I say Jacobs, I mean Jacobs, Webbs, Carters. Because those 3 families came out of Eastern Shore together, probably in the same wagon train or however they got here, already married. So at the core of the Jacobs is Jacobs, Webbs, Carter. Soon as we got here, the first thing we did, start man Brewingtons and Manuels. that was agenda item number 1, it appears, right? And so when I say Jacobs, if you're a Brewington and Manuel, this conversation also applies to you. Right under that, so I'm talking the left column, the yellow column. Other names that we married into: Hammond, Simmons, Sweat, Hardens, etc. Again, that's the people that are closely related to the Jacobs. So when I say Jacobs, any of those family names should feel like, oh, that could be me. The center column is all free people of color that were in North Carolina before 1800, right around before the Civil War. So you see some of those names, they're the same names, right? And if I move to my right column, that's the whole point here. Let's look at the free person of color names on Eastern Shore in the 1600s and 1700s. And you see some of those same names. So that's the point, is that these people moved from Eastern Shore into North Carolina before 1800, and they're the core of the folks that we're talking about. So let's just anchor ourselves in who this is. The arc of the story, which is some work that I'm doing with Colonial Williamsburg right now, so it's not what we're going to talk about today, but I want to get you into the context. It's from John Custis II to George Washington, because he was the stepfather and step-grandfather to the Custis grandchildren, to Robert E. Lee, who was married to a Custis. So that's the full arc of the story. And it encompasses these plantations. So all of these are visitable, that's the word, plantations, museums up in Northern Virginia, with the exception of Abingdon, which is where National Airport is. So if you fly into DC, into Washington National Airport, you're where that particular plantation was. That was John Parke Custis. And Custis Square is currently being excavated by Colonial Williamsburg. Now, for those, I've got some people in the room who come to family reunions. This is when they go, oh, that's another one of Tyrone's slides that has all this data and only he understands it. But no, just bear with me. We can get through this. what this is really, if I can get the clicker to work, and I can't. This is a timeline. So if you look along the bottom here, what you're looking at essentially is just a timeline. So think of it that way. Now at the top and the bottom, I have events. So that's what event is driving me to discuss this time period. So look at 1691 or 1696. That's John Custis's will. That's the event. Now, why am I worried about that event at that particular time? Because I need to worry about who is the enslaver, right? So this says in 1696, John Custis had a will. He was the enslaver. Why am I worried about that? Because these boxes are groups of people, right? So this is saying he had two sets of people. So light purple people and dark purple people. One set went to his widow and another set went to his grandson. So the purpose in this full thing, so that's the whole map. That's how you read this, right? So what it's really showing is the flow of people, is the show of people of color through the Custis Washington family, and showing how they got split up, how different people came in, how they married into each other, and how that had implications in terms of who was freed, who wasn't, and if I freed somebody, did I just split up a family, right? So that is the map. Again, that's something that Colonial Williamsburg and I are putting together to try to drive people to the various Mount Vernon, Tudor Place, Woodlawn, the different plantations in the chronological order. How does that apply to us today? Because that same, look to my far right here, that same anchor point, 1696, this is the literal people that were listed in John Custis II's will. And you see who's there: Gabriel, his wife Babs, his son Daniel, and his daughter Jenny. This is our people. So this is our anchor point. This is what I'm going to talk from. Prior to that, this is the prequel. You see how Gabriel shows up in this is every record that I can find him in before then. Mostly tax records. The one at the far end is an estate record. That's when he showed up as an asset in Peter Walker's estate, and Gabriel married the widow, and John Custis married the widow, and that's how he got, right? The red shows gaps that I don't have, where I don't have data. So particularly my folks on the Eastern Shore, if you guys are watching, if you guys are listening, if you've got records for me in those red areas, particularly from 1677 to 1696, or from 1655 to 1662, please throw that at me, because I can't find Gabriel in those time periods. But that's our anchor point for today, 1696. So let's go forward. 1696, Daniel Jacobs, that's your North Carolina people, he became free by 1704. And then his folks moved to North Carolina. That became us. Another paper that I'm doing that I'm going to publish later shows Jenny, who did not obtain freedom. And that's why I worry about the Custises all the way to emancipation, because her folks were mixed in all of that plantation, all that moving around people, because her people, so I had to research all of the Custis people to find Jenny's folks, because they were moved around as they were inherited, her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So that's that way. You guys with me, right? Okay, now this is the website that talks about Daniel's story, Gabriel's story, and Daniel's story. Later on, I'm going to post Jenny's story, the story of his enslaved sister. Feel free, it's free, INVA, freeinva.org. If you guys are watching, if you guys are in the room, you guys are in the room at Eastern Shore, if you guys want to pull it up and scroll through it, again, we're hybrid, we're a digital technology age. If you want to scroll through it while I'm talking, that's fine, so that you can have questions to ask during the presentation. That said, how am I doing on time, Shannon?
You got a minute left.
I got a minute left. So I've got a minute left. So I got 6 minutes for questions instead of 5. Any questions on the part that I've talked about thus far? Again, I know that was kind of disjointed. You feel like I was just throwing random bits of information at you, but that was to get you settled on who are we talking about? What is the time frame? What is my anchor point? Any questions on that part? I couldn't have been that clear. I'm not that good, really.
I don't have any in the chat either.
None in the chat?
Jenny Jacobs.
Yes, ma'am.
Jenny Jacobs.
I like you already. Yes.
Yes, who was Jenny Jacobs?
Who was Jenny Jacobs? Oh, I thought you said you were Jenny Jacobs. I was like, I like you already. Jenny Jacobs, if I back up, are they going to be able to see it on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if I can back up. Yeah. So Gabriel Jacobs was one of the people in the will, right? Gabriel, we know his wife was named Bab because we could see them on the tax record. And we know that the son is Daniel and the daughter is Jenny because the will literally says, Gabriel and his daughter Jenny go to my wife. So we know that's Jenny, and we see that Daniel and Bab go to the grandson. So we know who Babs is, right? Because she is listed with Gabriel as wife in the tax record. And Daniel, we find him free so we don't know how he got free because he wasn't freed by the will. The will only freed Gabriel. But somehow Daniel got free before 1704 because that's when we can find him behaving as a free man in court records with the last name Jacob. So, okay, now we know who you are, Daniel. You were there with your mama, and then you got the last name Jacob, so you were the son. Make sense?
Okay, we have a question from Thomas on Zoom. He would like to know what the difference between Jacob and Jacobs is.
I didn't expect that question, but I'm ready for it. So it's interesting. On Eastern Shore, the people's last name is Jacob. And, my mother's a Jacobs, and I've been doing this since I was 15. So I had to work really hard when I was taking notes my thing puts the S on there anyway, because I'm just used to typing it that way. But there's a family on Eastern Shore of Jacob. I believe the progenitor is Richard Jacob, and he shows up in the 1600s as well. He is not, I don't believe, related to Gabriel Jacobs, because Gabriel shows up around that same time frame, but Richard was still coming off of indenture himself. So he didn't have family, wealth. There was no, he wasn't owned, but he didn't own Gabriel. Gabriel came from the Custuses. But on Eastern Shore, the name is Jacob. And when Gabriel, all the tax records call Gabriel Jacob as well on Eastern Shore. But by the time we get to Virginia, as soon as we get to Virginia, it's Jacobs. I kind of think it's Jacobs because I've got a hunch that somehow we've got some lineage from Manhattan, from the Dutch in Manhattan, and there it would have been Jacobs because it would have been son of Jacob. So I don't know if that was a conscious thing in North Carolina where they've added the S back. Probably not. But I have a suspicion that New Netherlands, which is Manhattan today, has something to do with it.
Kelly from Zoom would also like to know, would Harriet Jacobs be part of this Jacobs line?
I'm glad you asked. No, she's about the only Jacob in North Carolina we're not kin to, so don't try it. her lineage actually comes, I can't think of it, I should have been ready for this question. Her lineage, once she's coming from Bertie County, now you're going to see that we dropped through Bertie County, but she comes from people that I think her family line, I want to say it goes to Knox, Knox. I think her biological lineage is Knox, but she's actually not related to us. There's a set of Jacobs. There's also Jacobs of color in Bertie County around Rich Square. We never matched them. Those of you who are in Ancestry, work those DNA matches. Don't just look at the ones at the top that say your first cousin, second cousin. Go look down at 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. That's going to those little bits. That's the little. A lot of them don't apply. A lot of them are junk. But if you swim through and you keep seeing the same name showing up, or if you see somebody in your neighborhood, that's probably legit. And so through all of my matches, we never match those people in Rich Square. It's a different set of Jacobs. Yes, ma'am.
There are Jacobs with the S in Brunswick County in the 1800s. Is there any?
Yep, absolutely. Same people. Exact same people. My partner, Luke Alexander, he's probably on. He does west of the Black River. I do east of the Black River. So all my examples, I'm glad I forgot to mention that. I'm so glad you asked the question. So what I was supposed to say on one of my slides is that my examples are going to come from east of the Black River because Luke and I work together. I do that. Luke documents the people west of the river. So Columbus, Bladen, Brunswick, Robeson County, that's him.
There was a Benjamin Jacobs that was a neighbor of my Ward family in Brunswick County. That's why I asked you the question.
Yeah, we came from that same set of folks that dropped down out of Virginia.
How about that?
Shall we roll?
We shall roll.
Okay. So I want to talk about how Jacobs are entrenched in the creation of America. Sometimes it's easy as people of color to think or feel like, you can be made to feel like you're a wart on the butt of America, or you're here by someone's grace, or you're here, as an accessory or or on the side. But it's important for us to understand that Jacobs created America along with everybody else. We're entrenched in the creation of this country. By the time the Revolutionary War started, we were already 100 and some years in. Right, we got here at least 1655, probably 1640 at least, right? So we were already in Virginia. In North Carolina, we were already more than 100 years in. So we volunteered and were drafted just like everybody else. Pender County Library has on their YouTube page a whole presentation on this. Myself, Luke Alexander, that I just mentioned, and Kevin Graham. We present a piece called "Free Men of Color from Southeast North Carolina in the Revolutionary War." We fought like gangbusters, and we fought alongside the Europeans. That war, the next time that we would fight alongside Europeans not segregated, was Vietnam. Right? So we were in the thick of it, just like everybody else. If you look at this list, and again, this is just people from my side of the river. Luke has additional names. You see 8 Jacobs named Jacobs, 2 Jacobs named Webb, and 2 Jacobs named Carter, all fought. And this is a partial list. I may not have all of them, and Luke has a whole nother set of people from the other side of the river. So what that meant then, since we were there and free so early, we participated in so many significant events in American history. We were there at John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry, Sheridan Leary. We were the founders. Look at the Fayetteville State University. I made purple all of the people that descend from us. So you might as well say we started Fayetteville State. Look how many purple people there are, right? From most of the HBCUs in North Carolina, many of the HBCUs across the South, we were at least faculty members. We started the Cleveland Home for the Aged Colored People, which still exists today. I think it has a slightly different name, but it still exists today. In the larger purple letters are some of the nationally known people that came from us: Harron Rebels, Charles Chestnut, Langston Hughes, George White. So we want to make the point that people of color were foundational to the creation of America. We own this. Now, what that means is when you own all the good stuff, you got to take ownership of all the not so good stuff too. So I think that puts us in a particular position where we have the opportunity to be models for the country, right? We can't say, when I say I was in North Carolina, my people have owned land since the 1750s. I can say that and be proud of that, but then I got to think about who we took the land from. So again, we own America, own it, folks, but own all of it and accept understanding and what am I going to do about all of it, the wonderful stuff and the not so wonderful stuff. So why were we here? Most free people of color Carolinians, pre-Revolutionary War I'm talking, came from Virginia. Now, why were they coming from Virginia? We followed the same patterns and goals as our white neighbors and our white kin, and that was to take land, native land. Again, we got to own the bad as well as the good. But why was it maybe important for us as people of color to move from Virginia? Well, Virginia had already been taken, right? Especially on the east side, that land had already been taken. So if I'm a free person of color, I probably couldn't buy. It would be easy for me not to be able to buy land. Like my dad's from Dinwiddie County. Dinwiddie County had pretty much been snatched up. So you couldn't buy more land in Dinwiddie County of any size. And so you had to eat and you had to pay taxes. And people of color paid twice the taxes as white people. A white couple, if the tax was $10, paid $10. The man was taxed. A couple of color paid $20. The man was taxed, the woman was taxed. So there you are. You can't buy land, have your own farm. You had to pay double the taxes. And if you look at University of Virginia Library, there's pages upon pages upon pages of documents where men of color were sold to pay taxes. You couldn't pay your tax bill, so you got sold to pay the taxes. So that's a very good reason to get up out of Virginia and go get my own land, but you got to remember where we got it from. But we did that. So now you've got this set of free people of color, pre-Revolutionary War, came from Virginia, and we start to grow. We start to bring in other people, other freed people, white people, Native people. This set of people starts to grow. And that's why we're in place to be the free people of color in Southeast North Carolina, pre-Civil War, change wars, pre-Civil War. So you by Civil War, you got this whole middle class of free people who have been free for generations. And that's why they had the assets, the network, and the education to jumpstart after the war. Because now after the war, free people of color means something totally different. It means everybody not white. And so now we need these schools, and now we need banks, and now we need benevolent associations, right? And so some of the free people of color were already in place to do that. And that's why you see us the superintendent of schools and faculty members and this is and that's. Make sense? Q&A. That was a lot, and I put some heavy stuff on y'all. I saw it on your face. You're like, ooh, I wish you hadn't said that. Any questions about, I think the toughest thing I said was the fact that people of color own America because we built it, co-own America because we built it, but owning it means you got to own the good stuff and the not so good stuff. That was the toughest thing. Everybody comfy with that? Or you want to think about it some more at home, or you want to throw something at me? What? Yes, ma'am.
So I think you're alluding to the fact that the land probably belonged to Native Americans. And so how did the free people of color acquire the land that once belonged to the Native Americans?
Okay, so the question, if people on Zoom couldn't hear it, the question is, if the land belonged to Native Americans, how did free people of color acquire it? The way it worked is what's very interesting doing this history is this was really all about the kings of England, the kings of Europe, because the Dutch and the Spanish and the Portuguese and the French and the English were all on America, trying to snatch pieces for themselves and fighting each other in the process. But where we're from, sort of mid-Atlantic, that was the English folks. And that's why our story is told from an English perspective. The way it worked, the King of England said, hey, I like that land over there because I sent an explorer and they said it was great. I'm going to take it and I'm going to name it for King Charles and I'll call it Charolina. It's mine. Irrespective of those people there, yeah, that's mine. I'm going to send people there or encourage people to go there to seize bits of it and pay me taxes. So when we see records that says, Abraham Jacobs got a land grant or someone patented land, patented, and that just means taking a bit of it. What that literally is saying, hey, King, you said you own this whole place called Carolina. Give me these 660 acres. I'll farm it or fish on it or do whatever, but I'll pay you taxes on it. And, we'll deal with the people on it. We'll get them off of it. So people of color did that just like, it's funny. People of color weren't the only ones coming out of Eastern Shore. The Costons, who lived next door to the Jacobs right on, when my granddad was growing up, they came out of Eastern Shore. The Starlings, who lived in Sampson County with us, they came out of Eastern Shore. So, it's literally American history. That's why I say we own history. We were there, people were coming down out of Eastern Shore. People were still coming from England, coming from Germany, coming from whatever. But that whole idea of land grants and patenting land is just saying, I am loyal to you, King. So give me this and you get the tax money. Are we doing good? Okay. Oh, I had a question.
The free people of color, how did they remain free during slavery? Was that a hard thing for them to deal with? Or was it something that was easy? Because I'm assuming that because they were free people of color, and slavery was still going on, could it have been sold back into slavery or, what kind of issues did they have?
Yeah, the question was how hard or easy was it for free people of color to remain free? It was like temperature, just like, I was complaining with somebody in the room today about, it's cold right now. There were times when it was tough. Like I said, in Virginia, men of color were sold for tax. Now, they may not have been sold into slavery for taxes. It may have been they may have been told it was indenture until you pay off your tax bill. But there's always that risk that that indenture not get recognized and you're back in permanent slavery. Those of you who come to the family reunion have heard me tell you this before. You know, my third-time great-grandfather, Matthew Jacobs on Cypress Creek, indentured himself for life to his neighbor, John Costin. So essentially a free man of color saying, hey, you, I'll be your servant for life, which is called servitude, which is called slavery, right? But that was around, I want to say 1829. That was a time when it was real tough in this area for people of color. And so knowing my history, knowing that the Costins were not just our neighbors, but our kin, he actually was legally setting himself up next to somebody that he knew could legally protect him, right? So, oh, you can't attack me as a free person of color. You can't do this to me because I'm his servant. Now you have to really trust that person. So that shows you how tight the Jacobs and the Costins were. So yeah, it's a constant, like today, it's a constant negotiation. Okay, so we just did entrenched, right? People of color, Jacobs, are entrenched in the formation of America. Now we're going to talk about this breakthrough that Luke and I had that got us back to Eastern Shore. And it has to do with the fact that we were employed by a particular family called the Pugh family. And the time period that we're looking at is from, I'm going to go from like, from the 1700s, 1750 to 1730. I forgot to reference the timeline in my previous part. My previous timeline was 1800s up to 1750, right? Now I'm 1750 back to 1730. So let's look at that. So at the top is old news. And when I say old news, I mean, if hopefully there's people on Zoom that, are some of my Jacobs researchers that have been doing this for a while. So if you've been doing Jacobs research for a while, you already knew that the Jacobs and the Webbs and the Carters were in Cumberland and Duplin County by 1752 because of the tax records. You already knew that. You already knew that the most of that first set of Jacobs ended up moving to New Hanover, which is today Pender, Cypress Creek, up near 421 Pineywood Road, north of Pineywood Road, there. You already knew that they were there by 1759. Old news. You already knew that Abraham Jacobs didn't move, so he stayed right there on the Six Runs Creek as it became Sampson County, right next to Amy Brewington, right next to Shadrach Pugh. You already knew that. But what we found a couple of years ago was this, I don't want to say a new record, it's 1745, but this record got published by Paul Heinig. Thanks to Paul Heinig, I hope you're on, who wrote the book, who continues to write the books, Free African Americans in Virginia, North Carolina, and Delaware? Maryland. He published this new record that said Isaac Jacobs in Chowan County was sued by Francis Pugh's estate for the repayment of a 500-pound loan. So when I saw that, I got all excited. I was like, whoa, okay, because we also knew, back to what we knew, we also knew that there was a Gabriel Jacobs up there. We saw that there was a free Gabriel Jacobs. We saw Paul Heinig's book, but we couldn't make the connection between us and Southeast North Carolina and Gabriel in Northampton, Virginia. But this 1745 document, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Now I'm halfway there. I'm in Northern North Carolina. And he's hanging out with this Pugh family, and 500 pounds today is more than $100,000. You don't lend $100,000 to somebody you don't know very well, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, who are these Pugh people? Then I went, Pugh. Where do I know that name? Abraham Jacobs is living next to a Pugh. So I went full in on the Pugh family. You are now looking at the expert on the Pugh family in Virginia and North Carolina. I know more about Pughs than Pughs know about Pughs. When I tracked the Pugh family, they were in Bertie and Chowan County. They were living literally on Indian Woods. So they were faux friends of the Tuscarora. They were Indian commissioners. They were living on Indian Woods and happened to end up owning a lot of it, right? But before then, they were in Nansemond County. That, did I show this picture? Yeah, this picture right here, Pughsville Road, that's on I-664 in my hometown, Tidewater. I drive under this sign every time I go home. They were literally where I grew up. Which made sense. And this is why your DNA is important. And this is why looking at your small DNA is important. So when I tracked the Pughs to Nansemond County, I was like, that's why I matched those Cuppies that I grew up with. Just about 10 or so years ago, I found small DNA matches with the Cuffey families that I literally went to school with. So I had figured, the Jacobs had to drop through here. Well, sure, they dropped through here because they were hanging out with the Pews. Now, why were they hanging out with the Pews? So now I'm close. Now I'm in Tidewater. I got 18 miles across the bay to get to. I'm like, okay, I'm close. You know, I got from where I am, I got to Shawan, Bertie County. Now I'm in Nansemond County, so I'm in Tidewater, Virginia. I got to get across the bay. How do I get across the bay? So I kept researching the Pews. They married women from the Eastern Shore. All of these people were wealthy global merchants. And when I say global merchants, I mean they built ships and took tobacco from Virginia and North Carolina to London, to Amsterdam, and to New Amsterdam, which is Manhattan. So they were serious about their business. And so when I found that the Pews had married Eastern Shore people, including into the Harmonson family. The Harmonson family is important for us as Jacobs Webbs, and here's why. And I knew I'd hit it when I found this Harmonson family. Francis Pugh married a Harmonson. The Harmonsons, you notice that that previous slide, Daniel Webb sort of disappeared. He wasn't in John Custis's will. He was in the tax record. I forgot to point that out. In the tax records, when John Custis only had 6 enslaved people, 4 of them were our people. Daniel Webb and his wife, Gabriel Jacobs and his wife. That's us. And a lot of the Webbs stayed on Eastern Shore, by the way. So there's a lot of Webbs. I'm hoping y'all are watching. You're us too. But you know, Daniel Webb and his wife and Gabriel Jacobs and his wife were 4 of 6 people that Custis enslaved from the jump. But Daniel Webb was not in the will. Somehow he had moved to the Harmonson family. How do I know this? Because the Harmonsons freed him and gave him land. So the Harmonsons have a relationship with us. They have another relationship with us because the Harmonsons administered the will of Daniel Jacobs in 1733. And I should post that estate. Daniel Jacobs was doing quite well. He had land, he had wheat, he had cattle, he had all what other kind of animals? Sheep. I mean, he was doing pretty well. And the Harmonsons administered that estate when he died in 1733. So now I've got it. That relationship. So now I know that the Pews were hanging out on Eastern Shore because that's where their in-laws were. Gabriel Jacobs was freed. Why? The will said he was freed to work after he worked 4 more years on Custis's ship. Gabriel was a seaman. That's why the Pews got the Jacobs to work with them. You don't need to drag farmers from county to county to county. You can find a farmer when you get there, right? But a skilled trade like a seaman, that's the people that you hire and take with you from county to county to county. That's why you lend them $100,000, 500 pounds in 1745. You don't lend a farmer $100,000 at 17, you know. But you might lend that to a seaman. Maybe it was to build the ship. I don't know what it was. But that is proof enough for me that we followed the Pews. We were employed by the Pews. We were employed as seamen by the Pews. Do I have a pay stub Pew to the Pew from the Pew to the Jacobs as a seaman? No. But the circumstantial evidence to me supports that's why they hung together all the way down to living next to each other in Sampson County on the 6 Runs Creek. Now, the last thing is, next to the last thing is, I think they left Eastern Shore after Daniel died in 1733 because Gabriel Manley and his wife Dinah Webb show up in Norfolk County in 1735, I believe, on the tax records in Norfolk. So I can see that they moved. I don't see the Jacobs on the tax record, but this Gabriel Manley, 1, he's married to a Webb. And 2, I think he's Daniel's son because he has the first name, Gabriel. His mother was a white servant woman named Elizabeth Manley. And who was in that neighborhood at that time? Our boy Daniel. And they moved together. You look, Gabriel first married a Webb. He's in Norfolk County in the right time. And then he goes to Bertie at the same time frame as the rest of the Jacobs. So I think that's when I think Gabriel is Gabriel Manley. I can trace my Jacobs that way. Okay, real quick, and then I'll go to Q&A. This is just to show you the spread of the Jacobs. So the reddish ones and the blue one, that is us today. We also got Jacobs. The same time we dropped down into southeastern North Carolina, a brother dropped down into Richland, South Carolina. Same folks though. But then you see, I got up, the green was when I got to Shawan County. The orange is when I got to my home, Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Nansemond County. And then I swam across 18 miles across the bay to Eastern Shore. So that's geographically our flow. Questions?
I'm interested in the last name Manley. Is there any connection to the Manleys that were in Wayne County?
So the question, I'm going to repeat it just in case it's not heard on Zoom. The question is the name, are these the same Manleys in Wayne County? I'm not certain. I haven't been able to tie them in, but I do know that there's Manleys in Bertie. There's Manleys that moved over, those folks I believe moved over to Granville County. And you're right, there's a set of people in Wayne, down Goldsboro, even down to Sampson Way. I don't know yet. I think by the time that guy hit, I think those folks are identifying as white, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not the same people, because the Carters, many of the Carters, by the time they got here, they were identifying as white. So I don't know yet.
Well, I've been working on that family a little bit. I haven't lately, but.
Oh, we are going to trade email addresses. That's what's going to happen.
Alex Manley is down in Wilmington. He was the editor of the newspaper that calls the coup in Wilmington. So he was the governor's son, I understand, governor of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
I understand. That may be the connection.
Good point. That Alex Manley was involved in the Wilmington insurrection in 1898. I get it right there? 1998. Any more questions on how we moved? I'll move up a little bit so you can see that. On how we moved from county to county. Okay, nothing in chat.
No.
Okay, I'm going to keep rolling. So we did entrenched. We did employed as free people of color. So now we're going to talk about us as enslaved. This picture is actually a picture of an architectural drawing. So it's not like something that somebody just dreamed. They actually excavated the Arlington plantation, the original Arlington plantation. And this is what was drawn based on what they excavated. This is their thought of what it would look like. And interesting, so, I live in DC, so Arlington, Virginia is right across the river, of course, right? But that was named after Arlington Estate, which is Robert E. Lee's home, which because he was, which he inherited from his father-in-law, George Washington Parke Custis, who named it after that house in Eastern Shore, right? So everything comes full circle. The other thing about that house, let me go here again. I think our ancestor helped build, I'm sure our ancestor helped build this house, because this was the biggest and best house in Virginia at the time. The governor literally lived at Bacon's Rebellion when the governor was run out of, it wasn't Williamsburg at the time, Jamestown-ish. He actually fled to this home. This is where he ruled as governor for some time. But it was built, I want to say the 1760s. So Gabriel was enslaved by John Custis while John Custis is building this house. So you think Gabriel was like picking daisies or knitting sweaters for children? Nah, he was making bricks. He was digging cellars. So again, we're intrinsic in the creation of America, right? So the best house in Virginia at the time was built by our ancestor, in part. I mean, he didn't do all this himself. He might have been a great Jacobs, but not that great Jacobs. So enslaved, how do we get here? So Peter Walker, he was the son of a candle maker, and he migrated from London to the English colony of Virginia around 1639, excuse me. Talking about Peter, right after he got here, he was tried for beating his English servant boy to death. And all of the evidence is pretty gruesome. Nobody argued that the boy was beat. Nobody argued that the boy is dead. There was discussions around how big the rod was that it was struck, how often he was struck, how hard he was struck, so nobody disagreed that this child was tortured. It was, was he tortured all the way to death or the flavors of that. In the end, Peter Walker was not convicted because they examined the body and they thought, well, you know what? The body shows some disease, so it could have been disease. But they didn't care about this boy. He was an English boy, and he was dead, and that was that. Alice Burdett, who later on would marry Walker, she was tried for abusing an orphan girl under her care. This was an orphan neighborhood child. She was taking care of the child. The testimony says that if the child soiled herself, it was a little girl, if she soiled herself, Alicia would throw her in a creek. So these people were charming, I tell you. just wonderful examples of humanity. Peter was a global wealthy merchant. Sound familiar? Global wealthy merchant. We have a lot of those in the story, right? He was a member of the House of Burgesses because they had a pretty low moral standard. He was arrested by the local court several times between 1640 and 1655. He was arrested for attacking fellow judges, for fist fights. I mean, he was quite a rowdy character. And he is the first one that we see enslaving Gabriel Jacobs. So that was a party, huh? I mean, these are the people that are enslaving you. Peter Walker, who beat a servant boy to death. Alicia, who would throw a soiled baby into the creek to clean off. These are the first people that enslaved Gabriel Jacobs. John Custis II, he was a merchant, a global wealthy merchant. He migrated from the Netherlands, Rotterdam, to the colony of Virginia in 1650. And by 1655, he was on his second wife, and that's when he married Alicia, our friend, Miss Thrower in the Creek, and Peter Walker's widow. And that's how he got Gabriel. So that's my first glimpse of Gabriel. It's 1655. It's Peter Walker's estate. So it lists pots, pans, candles. The estates were very particular because there wasn't that much. Think about the time frame, stuff. I mean, they would literally list one broken pot. Stockings, 6 pairs of stockings. Every minute thing was listed, including humans. So Gabriel, William, and Joan were listed as Negro children. And that's our first glimpse of Gabriel. So I see Gabriel there. He's not listed by his last name, but poof. One, I know that John married the widow, so he got all the stuff. And then I see in John's household, remember that slide, I see Gabriel showing up. And then later on, Gabriel showing up with his last name in the household. So I know it's my Gabriel. So, yeah, so I guess I pre-talked about my building the mansion part. Any questions on this part? Like how Gabriel came to be, how he came to be enslaved by John Custis II.
No questions? Lots of people enjoying it though.
Okay, good. I'm gonna go back and take a quick look to see if I missed anything that I wanted to stress. Okay. So we did what? We did Jacobs are entrenched in the formation of America. We did Jacobs were employed by the Pews, probably as seamen, and that's how we're able to track them by tracking the Pew family and knowing that we were with them. We did Jacobs were enslaved by Custis, John Custis II. Now we're going to look at imported, because he didn't just pop up one day, right? So in those time frames, Portugal was one of the first European countries to have a working slave port in Africa. What was happening in the world is what's happening now, because then the world was populated by humans, and now the world is populated by humans. So people fight, that's what they do. So there was war in the Congo. The Congo kingdoms were fighting against each other. There was war in Europe. The European kingdoms were fighting against each other. There was war on the American continent. Different tribes were wrestling against each other. So the big change, if you look at my website, I make the point, the big change was the water. You know, the European countries had figured out how to build faster, better ships that could go further. And they were like, this we can use. So they took their war to other people's shores. So that's when we were able to go to America and start in India, right? And start wars there. Well, exploit people's wars there so that they could get the land and get the assets, right? So, and Portugal was one of the first at that. So this shows that they were able to go from Portugal to Luanda. So they built a slave port in Luanda, Angola. When the Congo countries were fighting against each other, they would get the captives, they would load them into Luanda. And the plan was they would go from Luanda, Portugal, over to Brazil to deposit the people at the sugar plantations where they would be worked to death. Then from there, they would pick up sugar and rum, byproduct of sugar, take that back to Portugal to sell, and that's their trade loop, right? So from Portugal, I bring trade goods like beads, fabric, guns. I trade those for humans. I take the humans to Brazil. I trade those for sugar and rum. I take the sugar and rum back to Europe, and that's my loop. That was their plan, and that worked most of the time. However, again, all these European countries are fighting each other. The Dutch were fighting the Portuguese, and their trade loop was they had a colony in I just lost how to pronounce that word, Curacao, and they had a colony in Manhattan, Wall Street, right? It was called New Amsterdam. New York was called New Netherlands. Manhattan was called New Amsterdam. So they would trade back and forth. That's the blue that's the blue one. But they would run across each other at sea, and they were enemies. So the way the first Africans got to America is the Dutch would pirate the Portuguese ships. And there's documents of this. Like the 1619 that we just celebrated, those were pirated Angolas. They were deposited in Tidewater, right? They came from a Dutch ship that had pirated a Portuguese ship that took the stuff, including the people, and said, ooh, prizes. What am I gonna do with these? I'm gonna sell them somewhere, yay. So that is can I tell you the ship that Gabriel was on? Can I tell you that he was actually this way rather than, or whether it was him or his parents? I cannot say that, but I can clearly say with confidence that that's the pattern of how people were moving in the time period that he was born, since I know in 1655, he was a boy. And since I know in 1662, he was tithable. So he was at least 16 in John Custis's household to be listed there as taxable. So that gives me a good range for his age, right? So in that time frame, this is how things were looking. So this is just a list of how things were moving in not just Eastern Shore, but also in New Amsterdam. They were moving kind of parallel. So 1613, Jan Rodriguez, an Angola mulatto, was actually the first non-native resident of Manhattan. There was a trading expedition, if I remember correctly, but he was the one that remained there, married native women, and stayed. So the first non-native resident of New York was the man of color. 1619, that's what we just celebrated, right? But they were Angolans. There were 20 plus Angolans that a Dutch ship sold to the English in Hampton. Now, the italics is just kind of trying to give you an idea of how many people were on the ground in Eastern Shore as Gabriel is showing up there. 1620, Thomas Savage was the first permanent English colonizer on the Eastern Shore Akamai people's land. By 1621, there were 9. 1622, now I'm going back to New Amsterdam. This is the first set of a large set of Angolans in New Amsterdam, 22. So that parallels our 1619. In 1625, we had 51 English colonizers on the Eastern Shore. 1625, we got 23 Negroes, that's the language that's in the record, across all of Virginia, 0 on the Eastern Shore. Now I'm getting close, right? Gabriel was born around 1640. 1625, I got 0 Black people on the Eastern Shore. By 1635, I can find 14. By 1640, I can find an additional 18. And let me talk about how I find them. I go through wills. I go through court documents. I go through, again, land grants. In that time period, you got 50 acres of land for every person that you brought into the colony. Whether you brought in your wife, your kids, your neighbors, white indentured servants, Black indentured servants, Black slaves, didn't matter. Heads that could line up to the king, 50 acres. And so sometimes they're listed, so-and-so Negro. Sometimes they will say, and 8 Negroes. That's annoying. But I go through and read, and that's how I track every person I can find, because we're there so early. I'm like, one of these names, one of these names is mine. 1640, Gabriel Jacobs born. And by 1655, I've got a 74 additional that I've been able to track. So you see, it's not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on Eastern Shore. It's less than 200 people on Eastern Shore, people of color on Eastern Shore when Gabriel is born. Now, he could have been born to one of those Generation 1 Angolans. So he's Generation 2, I'm thinking, right? He could have been born to one of Generation 1. He could have been born to one of those 1619 folks we just celebrated, because some of them show up on Eastern Shore. We know that. We know their names. That could be true. I don't know that it's true. He could have been kidnapped directly from Angola as a child. Not a pretty thought, but that could have happened. Or he could have been trafficked. Remember the map I had? He could have been trafficked through New Amsterdam, through the Dutch. As I was saying before, when I replied to the Jacobs question, I've got DNA matches, a whole lot of them, to the family of Leer Kuykendahl. Kuykendall. Kuykendahl. It's a Dutch name. They were right up there in Manhattan and Albany in the 1600s. And I match them. Wonder why. So I can't say it's Gabriel, because again, if you're part of this community, however you call yourself today, if you white, native, Black, however you call yourself today, if you're descending from this community, it's old DNA. Like, we were there before slavery was hardened. That's why we were able to get free often, because the rules weren't hard yet. So we were able to slip through cracks and negotiate and manage, right? But that also means your DNA is so old that it could have come from all these different places, because I'm not just a Jacobs. I'm a Jacobs, Manuel, Brewington, So I can't say I matched this little Kuykendahl guy. It must be my Jacobs. Could have been Rodriguez, could have been Manuel, could have been so many other, any other lines that I had. Q&A, this is the last one. So get your questions out.
I'll start us off with one from Zoom. Leroy asked if there is a list of all the surnames as it relates to the Jacobs family.
I have a list like similar to this one. I'm paging. Yeah, I have a list similar to this one, but again, it's only from my side of the river. And why? I mean, looking at our arch enemies, we talk every day. We have a research group. There's 4 of us. We call ourselves Free Roots. We literally are in this little chat room. We chat every day. We share everything. So when I say Luke does west of the river, and I do east, it's just because I can't out Luke. He's got his surnames. He's got his people. And so when I want something from that side of the river, I say, hey, Luke, who's that person over there? And likewise me, right? So I've got my side of the river. I have an enhanced version of this chart that shows right here. Luke probably has something on his side, but that's the best we got.
Yeah. So thank you.
Anthony Johnson, 1619, almost there in the middle. Is that the Anthony Johnson who did become a slave owner?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so she raised a good question. She asked Anthony Johnson, is that the same Anthony Johnson that became a slaveholder? Yes, he's the Anthony Johnson of 1619. Mm-hmm. He shows up in Eastern Shore, and I'm gonna mess this up, and the real historians on this line are gonna kill me. He has a significant court case because he refused to free his slave, and I forgot why. But yeah, he's an Angolan off of the 1619 ship. He ended up on Eastern Shore, ended up free, and ended up as an enslaver. And his one of his slaves took him to court, and he refused to release him.
Somehow, some way, I remember him losing everything.
There was a fire, and he lost everything. But he was so highly thought of in the county that the county passed a particular law for him and his wife that they should not have to pay taxes anymore because they had a hard time. Yeah. So there you go. And there was a John Johnson, I think. I know there's a surname Johnson, but there's another Johnson family. I don't know if it's the same as Anthony's, but I want to talk about them because the way I know these people are Angolan is because they kept carrying their names. Like John Johnson on the Eastern Shore named his farm Angola. And when you go to the records in New Amsterdam, because the Dutch pattern of naming is that you would often carry the last name of where you're from. So I would be Tyrone de Burgal, right? So a lot of times those people were literally named Jan de Angola, Mary de Angola, so-and-so Van Angola. So they are clearly pointing at where they came from. Okay, so you can actually ask questions across any of the slides because that was the end of my slides. We talked about entrenched. We talked about employed. We talked about enslaved. We talked about imported. Prior to that, we talked about some of the work that I'm doing with Colonial Williamsburg to try to map together all of the Custis plantations, because I want to do a shout out. If you're ever up in the Northern Virginia area, don't feel like, I'm gonna go to plantation. That's no fun. They're actually doing very good work. They each of them has really taken seriously the charge of showing people of color and how they live there. So it's not just, the Arlington house that I showed you that Gabriel built, that's a field now. But just as an example, they wouldn't say, this is the house that John Custis built. They would say, this is the house, enslaved people built it, on behalf of John Custis, so that the narrative is really showing what really happened. I believe it was Woodlawn that I visited. That's in the southern part of Alexandria. You see this beautiful dining room, and they show you the dining room with the silver and everything. And then there's a small plate, and it has a fish or two on it and a handful of meal. And they said, but this is the recreation of the enslaved people that worked in this room. So they're really trying to show everybody that was on the land. What Colonial Williamsburg and I want to do is create sort of a website that maps chronologically. So you can, and they show Mount Vernon shows the people's stories. This is the Carolyn Branham story. This is the da-da story. So you get to see the people's story. But what we want to do is show that timeline that I have so that you can map and get down to, now I look at Mount Vernon. Now I look at this one. Now I look at that one. Now I look at this one. Because all of those were the same people. We want to tie those families back together. I can see some of those families going from plantation to plantation to plantation. Each museum right now is talking about the people on their land. What my passion is to show that family, tie that family back together because they're lost now. And I want to get them back together. Any other random Jacobs questions?
We have a question of how can I track my Carters in Eastern Shore, in particular during the 1700s and early 1800s?
Start with Paul. If any person of color researcher that does not use Paul Hynek's book, you are crippling yourself. You might as well pluck your eye out. It's called Free African Americans in Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland. An older version is available online for free. He just came out with version 6, I want to say, edition 6 is available for purchase now. It has the Carters in it. What he does is he maps to all of these primary records. So what you do, to answer your question, what you do is a good start is to go to Hynek's book, go to his section on Carters, and then go read all of his sources. He will tell you, he just doesn't make stuff up. He will show you what court record, what tax record, what this, and follow that because his work is good. So you're not checking behind him. But with your family story and your mindset, if you go look at the primary records, you will find other stuff, right? So, for example, I know that Daniel Jacobs' wife was a Carter. Paul said that, right? But then a couple of months ago, I said, well, let me look at the Carters more. So I did this myself. Let me look at the Carters more. I followed all the Carters, mapped all of the Carters, started with his book, but mapped them all, put them on a timeline. And it became even more clear to me that he's exactly right because her name was Elizabeth. By the time I mapped all the Elizabeths, the only one that was available to be Daniel's wife was this particular one. So not only did I know what Paul said, that his wife was a Carter, I was like, it's you. And then I know your mama, and I know your grandmama, and I know your dad. But I started with Paul. Are you guys researching on your own? Folks in the room? Yes, sir.
Something that I found interesting that might be missing is the Simmons and Fairclough.
Don't get me started on Simmons. I got a whole Simmons paper. We have to talk. Well, there's two sets of Simmons. There's the Farabee Simmons folks. That they came out of Virginia, like I just said. But then there was a Jeremiah Simmons. That guy I think is different. I think he's honestly white. There's a whole other set of Simmons of color, some of whom are white now, but they came from Virginia's free people of color. But I think Jeremiah's folks came a different way. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to totally agree with you on Paul Hennick's book, because I was able to trace my Robbins family through that book. I mean, it's well documented, and I agree with you.
Thank you.
If you're doing research for people of color, that's the way to go first.
Yeah, so folks on Zoom, the lady said that she's researched her Robbins family with Paul Hennick's book, and she agrees that that's one of the best places to start.
Now, when the Brunstons came up from South Carolina, you know they settled in several areas, Sampson and Brunswick. Do we know what other areas they settled in? I'm gonna have to send you my Brewington paper. Oh, you did. You sent it to me.
Okay, so they look like they're all around there, right? One of the brothers was begins with a J. I want to say Joshua. One of them was in New Hanover, but his line died out really quickly. And then there was a couple of other brothers that I don't find ancestors from. Really, everybody's coming off that Amy Brewington,
Yeah.
which is strong. Like the woman, I can find 3 male Brewingtons and 1 female. The males seem to have petered out, but the woman, we got Brewingtons out there yin yang today, and they all came from Amy, the woman.
I would just like to make another comment. There is the lady that is a member of the DAR, and she descended from the manual in Blaine County.
Excellent.
What was the name of the author, the last name?
Heinegg, Heinig. So again, I think it's freeafricanamericans.com or something like that. So again, an older version is available online, but I encourage you to give him his due because he's done a lot of work. He needs to get paid.
Clarification, you said Heinegg,
Mhm.
and the book's name is?
Free African Americans in Virginia, North Carolina, and Virginia, something like that. A lot of times people get put off by the name. They're like, African Americans, that's not me. I'm telling you, if you don't use that book, you might as well cut your eye out. It's like you're crippling yourself. Why cripple yourself? I don't care if the title was Martians that came down to Jamestown and built Stonehenge and invited Elvis to play there. I don't care. It's the content of the book.
What is his first name?
Paul.
Could you spell the name again?
Heinegg. Okay, are we at the end? Okay.
I'm just gonna put that in the chat for everybody at home.
So the one thing, speaking of people that need their money, Pender County Library, this is my 5th presentation with them. I love Pender County Library. Eastern Shore Public Library is my 1st presentation with them, so I'm already excited about working with Chris and Jasmine. You guys know, as politics move, as inflation moves, as things happen, it's often the arts and things like the libraries that get cut first or don't get their full budgets first. So I'm encouraging, indeed asking you, they didn't ask me this, but I'm saying this from my heart, go to their websites and donate to the Pender County Library and to Eastern Shore Public Library. So the more stuff like this can happen. They print copies, they do stuff, they keep the lights on. I didn't ask them, but I'm sure they don't have the money that they had, say, 5 years ago, because nobody does. And particular organizations like arts and libraries, it's just not happening in the times that we're living in. So help them out, help yourself out.
You had reference
family reunion. What is that?
Oh, my family reunion, which is, 200 of my closest friends. So Pender Rock family reunion. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to Tyrone. It was a very interesting and wonderful presentation. So thank you all and have a good weekend.